What if everything you've ever been taught about Jesus Christ was deliberately incomplete? What if the most powerful religious institutions on earth have spent centuries hiding a truth so profound that it would fundamentally change how we understand the most influential figure in human history? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Has this ever happened to you? You're sitting in church, reading scripture, or watching a religious documentary, and something feels missing, like there are gaps in the story that don't quite add up? Well, you're not alone, and your instincts might be more accurate than you realize. During the early 20th century, a man named Edgar Cayce began receiving revelations that would shake the very foundations of Christianity. These weren't just spiritual insights or mystical experiences. They were detailed, specific claims about Jesus Christ that directly contradicted nearly 2,000 years of church doctrine. And here's what makes this even more extraordinary. Cayce's revelations have remained largely hidden from the public for over a century, buried beneath layers of institutional silence and deliberate suppression. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you more than anything you've ever heard about the life of Christ. Cayce didn't just claim that Jesus was divine. That much the church readily accepts. Instead, he revealed something far more controversial, that Jesus wasn't the isolated, solitary figure we've been taught to revere. According to Cayce's readings, Christ was part of an intricate spiritual network, a carefully orchestrated divine plan that involved an entire family of spiritually prepared souls working together across lifetimes. Think about it. Doesn't it seem strange that the Son of God would arrive on earth completely disconnected from any human support system, that his family would be reduced to mere background characters in the greatest story ever told? Cayce argued that this narrative of isolation wasn't just incomplete, it was deliberately constructed to serve specific institutional purposes. The implications of this revelation are staggering. If Cayce was right, then Mary wasn't just a humble virgin chosen at random. Joseph wasn't merely a convenient carpenter who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The brothers and relatives mentioned briefly in Scripture weren't just distant cousins or close followers. Instead, each of these figures played essential, predetermined roles in a cosmic mission that had been planned across generations. But here's where this gets truly fascinating and perhaps unsettling. The early church fathers, according to Cayce, knew about this extended spiritual family. They understood the interconnected nature of Christ's mission. Yet they made a conscious decision to erase these connections from the official narrative. The question is, why would they do such a thing? What you're about to discover will challenge not just your understanding of Jesus, but your entire perception of how spiritual truth has been filtered, edited, and controlled throughout history. This isn't just about ancient secrets. It's about understanding how divine purpose operates through human relationships, and why acknowledging that truth became too dangerous for institutional Christianity to allow. If these spiritual revelations resonate with you, subscribing means you won't miss content that could shift your entire perspective on consciousness and divine purpose. The transformation in how we perceive divine intervention becomes even more profound when we understand that this wasn't some cosmic accident or random selection process. Cayce's revelations paint a picture of meticulous spiritual orchestration that spans lifetimes, where every soul involved in Christ's earthly mission was specifically chosen and prepared for their role. This kind of behind-the-scenes coordination challenges our entire mindset about how the divine operates in human affairs. When Cayce began sharing these revelations, the backlash was swift and severe. Religious authorities didn't just disagree with his interpretations, they labeled him a heretic. But here's what's fascinating about their reaction. It wasn't the spiritual aspects of his readings that threatened them most. It was the human connections he revealed. The idea that Jesus' family members weren't just passive observers, but active participants in a cosmic mission struck at the very heart of institutional control over religious narrative. Consider the impact of this hidden truth on your own spiritual journey. If Christ's mission required a network of spiritually prepared souls working in harmony, what does that tell us about how divine purpose manifests in our world? It suggests that the most significant spiritual transformations don't happen in isolation. They emerge from carefully orchestrated relationships and connections that we might not even recognize as sacred. Each member of this spiritual family carried what Cayce described as an invisible function. Mary wasn't just the mother who gave birth, she was the keeper of ancient bloodline wisdom. Joseph wasn't just the earthly father providing protection, he was the guardian of specific spiritual frequencies needed to anchor Christ's energy in physical reality. Even the brothers and extended family members who have been relegated to footnotes in Scripture carried essential pieces of this divine puzzle. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because what Cayce revealed about this spiritual network completely reframes our understanding of accessibility to the divine. For centuries, Christianity has presented Jesus as this untouchable, perfect being who descended from heaven, fully formed and separate from human experience. But Cayce's reading suggests something radically different, that Christ's greatness emerged precisely because he was embedded within a web of human relationships that supported, challenged, and prepared him for his mission. This shift in perspective has profound implications for how we understand our own spiritual potential. If the Son of God required a network of spiritually aligned souls to fulfill his purpose, what does that reveal about the importance of our own connections and relationships? It suggests that the decisions we make about who we surround ourselves with might be far more spiritually significant than we've ever imagined. The revelations get even more intriguing when we examine why church authorities worked so hard to suppress this information. It wasn't just about maintaining theological purity. It was about preserving a specific power structure that required believers to see divinity as distant and inaccessible except through official channels. Write in the comments, "I see the connections now," if this perspective is opening up new possibilities in your own understanding of spiritual relationships and divine purpose. The transformative power of this revelation isn't found in what it takes away from Christ's divinity. It's found in what it adds to our understanding of how that divinity actually operated. When we remove Jesus from that impossible pedestal where he's been placed as a solitary, untouchable figure, something remarkable happens to our own spiritual mindset. Suddenly, the path to divine connection doesn't seem so unreachable. If Christ needed relationships, support systems, and human connections to fulfill his purpose, then perhaps our own journey towards spiritual growth follows similar principles. This shift in perspective creates a domino effect that impacts every aspect of how we approach our faith and personal development. It suggests that the decisions we make about community, family, and spiritual fellowship aren't just social choices. They're fundamental components of our divine purpose. The hidden truth here challenges us to reconsider whether we've been approaching spirituality with the wrong framework entirely. But here's where this gets really intriguing, and I want you to consider the broader implications of what Cayce uncovered. If religious institutions were willing to suppress something this significant about Christ's family structure, what other transformative revelations might be buried in the archives of history? What other behind-the-scenes realities about spiritual development, divine purpose, and human potential have been carefully edited out of our collective understanding? The impact of asking these questions goes far beyond academic curiosity. It opens up possibilities that could completely revolutionize how we understand our own spiritual capabilities and connections. Cayce wasn't just revealing historical facts, he was unveiling an operational model of how divine missions actually unfold in human reality. I explore these transformative discoveries because they genuinely change how we understand our cosmic purpose. Subscribe if you're ready for more hidden spiritual truths. Now, I want to explore the most profound aspect of this revelation, because what Cayce discovered about Christ's support network fundamentally changes everything we think we know about spiritual accomplishment. According to his readings, Jesus didn't just have human family members supporting his earthly mission. He was connected to an entire network of souls, both incarnate and discarnate, who were actively involved in facilitating his journey from the spiritual realm. This concept suggests that what we perceive as individual spiritual achievement is actually the result of invisible collaboration between multiple levels of consciousness. The transformation that Christ brought to the world wasn't the product of solitary divine intervention. It was the outcome of coordinated effort between souls who had committed to this mission across multiple lifetimes and dimensions of existence. This revelation shifts our entire understanding of how spiritual breakthroughs occur and what's actually possible when we align ourselves with divine purpose. It suggests that none of us are truly working alone in our spiritual development, and that the support we need might already be orchestrated in ways we haven't yet learned to recognize. Write in the comments, "I feel the support now," if this understanding is helping you recognize the invisible network that might already be operating in your own spiritual journey. The deeper we dive into Cayce's revelations about this spiritual network, the more we discover that every major figure in Christ's life was positioned through what can only be described as masterful cosmic planning. Take Mary, for instance. The traditional narrative presents her as this humble young woman who just happened to be in the right place at the right time, chosen primarily for her moral character and willingness to serve. But Cayce's readings reveal something far more sophisticated behind the scenes. According to his visions, Mary wasn't a random selection from the general population. She was the culmination of generations of careful spiritual preparation. Her lineage carried ancient secrets and cosmic knowledge that had been preserved across centuries, specifically for the moment when the Messiah would need to incarnate. This wasn't just about finding someone pure enough to carry a divine child. It was about locating someone whose very DNA and spiritual essence had been refined over multiple generations to handle the extraordinary energetic requirements of such a mission. The transformation in how we understand Mary's role becomes even more significant when we realize that the decisions leading to her birth were orchestrated across lifetimes. Her ancestors weren't just random believers. They were souls who had committed to maintaining specific spiritual frequencies and knowledge systems that would be essential for Christ's earthly manifestation. The impact of this revelation completely reframes the entire nativity story. But here's what makes this even more fascinating. Cayce revealed that Mary wasn't just a passive vessel waiting to be chosen. She was an active participant who had prepared for this role across multiple incarnations. The hidden truth about her involvement goes far beyond the simplified story we've been taught. She carried within her consciousness the accumulated wisdom of ancient mystery schools and spiritual traditions that had been anticipating the Messiah's arrival for centuries. This completely challenges the mindset that religious institutions have promoted about Mary's role. Instead of being a young woman who simply said yes to an angel, she emerges as someone who had been consciously preparing for this mission throughout her soul's journey. Her spiritual heritage included direct connections to the deepest mysteries of divine incarnation and the practical knowledge needed to support a soul of Christ's magnitude. Now, I want to examine even more closely how this revelation about Mary's active preparation connects to something that Cayce discovered about her relationship with specific spiritual communities and mystery schools that were operating during her lifetime. Because what he revealed about these connections opens up an entirely new understanding of how divine missions are actually supported and facilitated in our world. Write in the comments, Mary was prepared, if this deeper understanding of her role is shifting your perspective on how divine purpose unfolds through careful spiritual preparation and lineage. The spiritual schools that Mary was connected to weren't just random religious communities operating in ancient Palestine. They were sophisticated mystery schools that had been maintaining specific knowledge and practices for generations. The Essenes, in particular, represented a behind-the-scenes network of spiritually advanced souls who understood the cosmic significance of what was approaching. These communities had developed precise methods for preparing vessels capable of channeling divine energy of the magnitude that Christ would require. What's absolutely fascinating about Cayce's revelations is that Mary's involvement with these groups wasn't something that happened after she became pregnant. It was part of her preparation from childhood. The decisions about her spiritual education were made by people who understood the bigger picture of what was unfolding across centuries. This completely transforms our mindset about how divine missions are actually orchestrated in human reality. The impact of understanding this level of preparation extends far beyond just Mary's personal journey. Cayce revealed that the entire network of souls surrounding Christ had been coordinating their incarnations and spiritual development across multiple lifetimes to converge at precisely the right historical moment. The hidden truth here is that what we perceive as spontaneous divine intervention was actually the culmination of meticulous planning that spanned generations. This revelation about centuries of preparation challenges everything we've been taught about the supernatural nature of Christ's birth. Rather than being an isolated miracle that broke all natural laws, it emerges as the flowering of a carefully cultivated spiritual lineage that had been working toward this moment for hundreds of years. The Church's decision to suppress this information makes perfect sense when you realize how it shifts the entire narrative from exclusive divine intervention to collaborative spiritual evolution. But the transformation in our understanding becomes even more profound when we discover that Mary's bloodline carried specific genetic and spiritual markers that connected her to other major biblical figures who had played crucial roles in preparing the way for the Messiah's arrival. Cayce's readings revealed that her family tree wasn't just randomly blessed. It was strategically designed to maintain certain spiritual frequencies and capabilities that would be essential for Christ's earthly mission. Now, I want to delve into the most controversial aspect of what Cayce discovered about this forbidden family network, because when we examine the connections between Mary's lineage and other pivotal biblical characters, we uncover evidence of a spiritual conspiracy that has been hidden from mainstream Christianity for centuries. The revelations about these blood and spirit connections reveal just how extensive this divine network actually was. Write in the comments, the network is real, if you're beginning to see how these ancient spiritual connections might still be operating in ways we haven't fully recognized in our modern world. The strategic separation of Christ from his human connections becomes even more apparent when we examine how religious authorities handled what might be the most controversial aspect of his family life, the question of whether Jesus had biological brothers and sisters. The behind-the-scenes decisions to minimize or completely reinterpret these relationships reveal a deliberate effort to reshape the narrative in ways that served institutional purposes rather than historical accuracy. Biblical texts clearly mention names like James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon. in contexts that strongly suggest familial relationships, yet for centuries, church doctrine has insisted these were merely cousins, close followers, or spiritual brothers, rather than actual siblings. This interpretation requires significant mental gymnastics to maintain, especially when you consider the natural way these relationships are presented in the original texts. The transformation of these clear family references into distant connections demonstrates just how far religious institutions were willing to go to preserve a specific image of Christ. Cayce's revelations about this larger family reality strike at the heart of why this information was suppressed. According to his readings, Jesus grew up in a household filled with siblings who shared not just blood ties but spiritual purposes. Each of these family members carried specific roles in supporting and sometimes challenging Christ's development and mission. The impact of acknowledging this changes everything about how we understand his formative years and the human relationships that shaped his consciousness. What makes this revelation particularly transformative is how it affects our entire mindset about spiritual development and divine purpose. If Christ needed the dynamic tension and support that comes from sibling relationships, the competitions, the loyalties, the everyday human interactions that define family life, then our own journey toward spiritual growth might require similar human connections and challenges. The hidden truth here suggests that isolation and separation from human relationships isn't the path to divine realization. Integration and authentic connection might be. The decisions made by early church leaders to suppress this information weren't just about theological purity, they were about maintaining control over how people understood their own potential for spiritual development. A Christ who grew up learning patience with siblings, navigating family dynamics, and developing his consciousness within the messiness of human relationships becomes far more accessible as a model for our own spiritual evolution. Now, I want to explore what Cayce revealed about the specific roles these brothers and family members played, not just during Christ's childhood, but in the continuation of his mission after the crucifixion, because this is where the forbidden family concept becomes even more controversial and revealing. Write in the comments, "Family matters," if you're recognizing how your own family relationships might be more spiritually significant than you previously understood. The transformation in how we understand Christ's development becomes even more profound when we consider what daily life might have looked like in a household with multiple children. According to Cayce's readings, Jesus wasn't raised in some isolated, perfectly serene environment where he meditated in solitude from childhood. Instead, he navigated the same complex family dynamics that shape all of us: sibling rivalries over attention, shared responsibilities for household tasks, the natural competition and cooperation that emerges when brothers and sisters grow up together. This perspective completely shifts our mindset about how spiritual mastery develops. Rather than emerging from separation and isolation, Christ's consciousness was refined through the constant decisions required when living in close quarters with family members who knew him intimately. The impact of this revelation suggests that the challenges we face in our own family relationships aren't obstacles to spiritual growth. They might be the very laboratory where divine consciousness learns to express itself through human experience. The behind-the-scenes reality of Jesus' spiritual preparation taking place within ordinary family conflicts and learning experiences brings an entirely new dimension to his teachings about love, forgiveness, and compassion. When he spoke about turning the other cheek or loving your enemies, he wasn't speaking from theoretical knowledge. He was drawing from the practical wisdom gained through years of navigating the inevitable tensions that arise when strong personalities share the same roof. But here's where the hidden truth becomes even more politically charged. The deliberate erasure of Christ's brothers from the official narrative wasn't just about maintaining theological purity. It was about eliminating potential sources of spiritual authority that could challenge the centralized power structure that the church was building. According to various apocryphal accounts that Cayce's readings support, James, one of Jesus's brothers, became a significant leader in the early Christian movement after the crucifixion. The decisions made to minimize or completely erase James's role revealed just how calculated the construction of official church doctrine really was. Historical evidence suggests that James led communities and preserved teachings that might have offered a different pathway for understanding Christ's message. Yet these contributions were systematically removed from the accepted narrative, not because they lacked spiritual value, but because they represented a form of authority that didn't flow through the institutional channels that church leaders were establishing. Now I want to examine what Cayce revealed about the most controversial figure in this forbidden family network, Joseph himself. Because what he discovered about Christ's earthly father challenges perhaps the most fundamental assumptions about the Holy Family that we've all been taught to accept without question. Write in the comments, "I see the bigger picture," if this understanding of how political decisions shaped religious doctrine is helping you recognize patterns in how spiritual truth gets filtered through institutional control. The revolutionary concept that Cayce revealed about family as a spiritual network completely transforms our understanding of how divine consciousness actually develops and operates. According to his readings, the ongoing processes of spiritual evolution don't happen in monasteries or isolated meditation retreats. They unfold in the daily interactions between family members who are unconsciously supporting and challenging each other's growth. The impact of this perspective suggests that every family dinner conversation, every sibling disagreement, every moment of cooperation or tension becomes part of a larger spiritual curriculum. This integration of ordinary life with spiritual development represents a complete mindset shift from traditional religious teaching. Rather than viewing family responsibilities and relationships as distractions from spiritual pursuits, Cayce's revelations present them as the very foundation where divine consciousness learns to express itself authentically. The hidden truth here is that the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of family life isn't something we need to transcend. It's the laboratory where transformation actually occurs. The decisions that family members make about how to support, challenge, and love each other become part of a behind-the-scenes spiritual education that can't be replicated in any other environment. If Christ's own consciousness was refined through these everyday family dynamics, then our own journey towards spiritual maturity might depend far more on how we navigate our closest relationships than on any formal religious practices we pursue. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of Cayce's revelations concerns Joseph himself, who has been relegated to little more than a footnote in the traditional nativity story. The official narrative presents him as this somewhat passive figure who simply accepted his role as protector and provider, then fades into the background once Jesus begins his ministry. Yet Cayce's readings reveal that Joseph's preparation for his role was as sophisticated and intentional as Mary's spiritual lineage. According to these revelations, Joseph wasn't just a convenient carpenter who happened to be available when the Holy Family needed earthly support. He was a soul who had been specifically prepared across lifetimes to carry the unique energetic frequencies required to anchor Christ's divine essence in physical reality. The transformation in how we understand his contribution reveals that the masculine principle of protection, grounding, and practical support was as essential to Christ's mission as the feminine principle of receptivity and nurturing. Now, I want to explore what Cayce discovered about the ancient wisdom traditions that Joseph carried within his consciousness, because these revelations about his spiritual preparation reveal an entirely different understanding of how divine missions are supported from the masculine perspective. Write in the comments, Joseph was chosen too, if this expanded understanding of his role is helping you recognize how spiritual support systems operate through both masculine and feminine principles. The ancestral wisdom that Joseph carried wasn't just accumulated knowledge passed down through family stories or cultural traditions. According to Cayce's readings, it represented direct spiritual inheritance from ancient mystery schools and esoteric traditions that had been maintaining specific frequencies of consciousness for generations. This behind-the-scenes preparation enabled Joseph to understand, even if not always, consciously, the magnitude of what was unfolding around him and his role in supporting it. What makes this revelation particularly transformative is how it reframes our entire mindset about masculine spiritual responsibility. Joseph's function went far beyond providing physical protection and financial support for his family. He was actively maintaining energetic stability and spiritual grounding that allowed Christ's divine essence to anchor properly in human form. The impact of recognizing this level of conscious participation shifts our understanding of what spiritual fatherhood actually entails. The concept of universal fatherhood that Joseph embodied represents something much deeper than biological relationship or even adoptive care. According to Cayce, Joseph carried the vibrational frequency of divine masculine protection and guidance that creates safe space for spiritual development to occur. His daily decisions about how to structure the household, when to offer guidance, and how to maintain harmony weren't just practical choices, they were spiritual services that supported Christ's mission. This hidden truth about vibrational preparation reveals just how sophisticated the planning for Christ's incarnation actually was. Joseph wasn't selected because he was conveniently available or particularly righteous by conventional standards. He was chosen because his soul carried specific energetic signatures that could sustain and support the extraordinary spiritual frequencies that Jesus would embody. Every aspect of his preparation, from his craft as a carpenter to his emotional temperament, had been developed across lifetimes to serve this purpose. The transformation in how we understand divine planning becomes even more profound when we realize that nothing about Christ's early environment was left to chance. The location where he was born, the community where he grew up, the economic circumstances of his family, even the timing of major historical events. All of these details were orchestrated to provide optimal conditions for his spiritual development and eventual ministry. Now, I want to examine what Cayce revealed about the most controversial aspect of this forbidden family network: the extended relatives and spiritual connections that were completely erased from the official narrative, because this is where we discover just how extensive the support system for Christ's mission actually was. Write in the comments, everything was planned, if this understanding of divine coordination is helping you recognize how spiritual missions might be supported through seemingly ordinary circumstances in your own life. Joseph's role as guardian of mystery reveals something profound about how divine purpose actually manifests in our everyday reality. Rather than operating through dramatic supernatural interventions, the most sacred missions often unfold through the decisions made by ordinary people who carry extraordinary spiritual responsibility. The transformation in how we understand this changes our entire perspective on what it means to serve divine purpose in our own lives. Joseph's daily work as a carpenter wasn't just a profession, it was a metaphor for his spiritual function. Just as he shaped wood into useful objects, he was actively shaping the energetic environment that allowed Christ's consciousness to develop properly. The behind-the-scenes work of maintaining household stability, providing emotional security, and creating an atmosphere where spiritual growth could flourish required skills that went far beyond manual labor. But the network of souls supporting Christ's mission extended well beyond his immediate household. John the Baptist represents perhaps the most intriguing example of how this forbidden family operated. According to Cayce's Revelations, John wasn't just a prophet who happened to recognize Jesus. He was a close relative who had incarnated specifically to prepare the way for his cousin's ministry. The impact of understanding this blood connection completely reframes the entire narrative of their relationship. The hidden truth about John's role reveals that he and Jesus had been coordinating their missions across multiple lifetimes, taking turns playing different parts in the same divine drama. Their souls were bound not just by family ties, but by spiritual agreements that spanned ages. This perspective suggests that John's function as the forerunner wasn't a separate ministry that accidentally intersected with Christ's. It was part of a carefully orchestrated sequence where each family member played their designated role at precisely the right moment. What makes this revelation even more compelling is how it demonstrates that the spiritual network surrounding Jesus included souls who were destined to play seemingly opposing roles. Some family members were there to provide support and encouragement, others to create the kind of challenges and tensions that would strengthen Christ's resolve and deepen his understanding of human nature. This suggests that even difficult family relationships might serve higher spiritual purposes that we don't immediately recognize. Now, I want to explore what Cayce discovered about the most controversial aspect of this spiritual conspiracy, how the early church systematically erased evidence of this extended family network, and why understanding their motives reveals patterns of institutional control that continue to influence religious interpretation today. Write in the comments, the family served together, if this understanding of coordinated spiritual missions is helping you see your own family relationships from a new perspective. The concept of energetic field creation that Cayce revealed represents one of the most sophisticated understandings of how spiritual missions actually operate in physical reality. According to his readings, the souls surrounding Christ weren't just randomly placed family members. They were carefully positioned to create a specific vibrational environment that could amplify and support his divine consciousness. The transformation in how we understand this goes far beyond individual relationships to reveal how collective energy fields enable extraordinary spiritual manifestations. The decisions made by early church authorities to minimize the importance of this extended network weren't accidental oversights. They were strategic choices that served specific institutional purposes. By reducing Christ's support system to just a few key figures, they created a narrative that made divine achievement seem impossible for ordinary people to replicate. The behind-the-scenes motivation was to maintain exclusive control over spiritual authority and prevent communities from recognizing their own collective power to support spiritual transformation. But the hidden truth becomes even more compelling when we examine the Apocryphal Gospels and ancient writings that church authorities worked so hard to exclude from the official canon. These texts contain detailed references to cousins, uncles, aunts, and extended family members who played significant roles in Christ's development and ministry. The impact of discovering these forgotten connections reveals just how extensive the spiritual conspiracy actually was. What's particularly striking about these suppressed texts is how they describe the interconnected nature of spiritual missions. Rather than presenting Christ as an isolated figure who achieved greatness through individual effort, They reveal a community-based approach to spiritual evolution where multiple souls coordinate their incarnations to support collective transformation. This perspective completely shifts our mindset about how divine purpose manifests in human experience. The recognition that Christ's mission connected an entire community of souls reveals something profound about how spirituality actually operates. Rather than being a solitary pursuit that requires separation from human relationships, spiritual development emerges through the intertwining of destinies and the conscious coordination of souls who have committed to supporting each other's evolution across lifetimes. Now, I want to examine the most controversial discovery that Cayce made about this forbidden family network. Evidence suggesting that these spiritual lineages didn't end with Christ's earthly mission, but continue to operate in modern times through reincarnated souls who carry forward the same collaborative approach to spiritual transformation. Write in the comments, "We're still connected," if this understanding of community-based spiritual missions is helping you recognize how your own relationships might be part of a larger divine coordination. The Essen community represents perhaps the most intriguing piece of this spiritual conspiracy that Cayce uncovered. According to his revelations, these weren't just another religious sect living in the desert. They were the keepers of ancient mysteries and spiritual technologies that had been preserved for generations specifically to support the coming of the Messiah. The transformation in how we understand their role reveals that Christ's extraordinary wisdom and spiritual power didn't emerge spontaneously, but was the result of sophisticated training within mystery school traditions. The behind-the-scenes education that Jesus received from the Essenes during his formative years explains how a young man from a small Galilean town could demonstrate such profound understanding of spiritual principles and healing techniques. These communities had developed precise methods for awakening consciousness and accessing higher dimensions of spiritual reality. The impact of recognizing this structured approach to spiritual development completely changes our mindset about how divine consciousness actually manifests through human experience. But what makes this revelation even more compelling is the discovery that Jesus' entire family had been connected to the Essen network for generations. Mary's preparation within this community wasn't something that happened accidentally. It was part of a long-term strategy to ensure that when the time came for the Messiah's incarnation, there would be a prepared vessel capable of handling such extraordinary spiritual energy. The decisions about her education, her spiritual practices, and even her understanding of her role were all carefully orchestrated within this hidden tradition. The hidden truth about these generational connections reveals just how sophisticated the planning for Christ's mission actually was. The Essenes understood that supporting a divine incarnation required more than just finding spiritually inclined individuals. It required creating entire family systems that could maintain the necessary energetic stability across multiple generations. This level of foresight and coordination suggests that the spiritual realm operates with a degree of precision and long-term planning that most people never consider. What's particularly striking about this revelation is how it demonstrates that the most significant spiritual transformations don't happen through isolated individual effort, but through the coordinated support of entire communities that have committed themselves to serving divine purpose across lifetimes. Now, I want to explore what Cayce discovered about how these ancient Essen practices and the spiritual lineages they supported didn't disappear after Christ's earthly mission, but continued to operate through hidden channels that extend into modern times. Write in the comments, "The training continues," if this understanding of structured spiritual education is helping you recognize how your own consciousness might be being prepared for purposes you haven't yet fully understood. The strategic decisions made by early church authorities to minimize the Essen's contributions reveal the calculated nature of how religious doctrine was constructed. By insisting that Christ's wisdom came exclusively from divine revelation rather than sophisticated spiritual education, they created a narrative that made extraordinary consciousness seem impossible to achieve through human effort or community support. The transformation in understanding this reveals how institutional control over spiritual development was established through deliberate information suppression. The behind-the-scenes motivations for this silence become even clearer when we recognize that acknowledging the Essene's role would have opened dangerous questions about spiritual authority and access to divine wisdom. If communities of dedicated practitioners could prepare souls for extraordinary spiritual missions, then the exclusive gatekeeping power that the Church was building would be fundamentally threatened. The impact of this institutional strategy shaped centuries of religious understanding and continues to influence how people approach their own spiritual development today. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Cayce's Revelations concerns what happened to this forbidden family network after Christ's earthly mission ended. According to his readings, the spiritual lineages and energetic connections that supported Jesus didn't simply disappear into history. They continued to manifest through reincarnated souls who carry forward the same collaborative approach to spiritual transformation. The hidden truth here suggests that the spiritual conspiracy Cayce uncovered isn't just a historical curiosity, but an ongoing reality. This perspective completely shifts our mindset about how divine purpose operates in modern times. Rather than being limited to ancient history, the same spiritual networks that supported Christ's mission continue to incarnate in different times and places, adapting their methods to contemporary circumstances while maintaining their essential function of supporting collective spiritual evolution. The decisions these souls make about where to incarnate, what families to join, and what missions to pursue are coordinated from spiritual dimensions in ways that most people never recognize. What makes this revelation particularly transformative for our current era is how it suggests that many of the spiritual seekers, healers, teachers, and consciousness pioneers emerging in modern times might be part of these continuing lineages. The journey toward awakening that so many people are experiencing isn't happening by accident. It might be part of the same divine coordination that brought Christ's forbidden family together centuries ago. Now, I want to examine the most profound implication of everything Cayce revealed about this spiritual network, because understanding how these ancient connections continue to operate today opens up possibilities for recognizing and activating our own roles in this continuing divine mission. Write in the comments, I recognize my part, if this understanding of continuing spiritual lineages is helping you see your own awakening journey as part of something much larger than individual development. Understanding how these continuing spiritual lineages operate in our modern world opens up entirely new possibilities for recognizing the sacred connections that might already be operating in your own life. The people you're drawn to, the spiritual teachers who resonate with you, the synchronicities that seem to guide your path. All of these might be part of the same divine coordination that Cayce revealed was supporting Christ's mission 2,000 years ago. What strikes me most about this entire revelation is how it transforms our relationship with both spiritual authority and our own potential. Instead of waiting for permission from institutions to explore our deepest spiritual questions, we're invited to recognize that divine truth continues to manifest through communities of souls who are committed to supporting each other's awakening. If you've stayed with me through this entire exploration of Cayce's forbidden family revelations, that itself might not be coincidental. The fact that you're here, listening to these ideas and feeling them resonate with something deep inside you, could be evidence that you're part of the continuing spiritual network that Cayce described. I create content like this because I believe these perspectives can genuinely transform how we understand our purpose and connections in this lifetime. If this resonates with you and you'd like to explore more of these hidden spiritual truths, subscribing to the channel ensures you won't miss future revelations that could shift your entire perspective on consciousness and divine purpose. Leave a comment saying, "This message was meant for me," if you made it all the way to the end and you're feeling that deep recognition that these aren't just historical curiosities, but living truths that relate to your own journey. If this content created that spark of recognition or opened up new questions about your own spiritual connections, hitting the like button helps this message reach others who might be ready for these revelations. There's a video right here that dives even deeper into how these ancient spiritual networks continue to operate in modern times and how you might recognize if you're part of one. Click and continue with me over there. The journey into these hidden truths is just beginning.